So my name is Cody LaPlante. I'm one of the technology teachers here at the Maryland School for the Blind. We both actually currently serve the academic programs and the functional academic programs. I do a lot of the kids in the younger grades, and Gina does a lot of the kids in the older grades, but just kind of my experience. I went to school outside Chicago. I moved to Baltimore 3 years ago to accept the job here, and yeah, it's been great. So great to see everybody again, and for people I haven't met before, welcome. So
I'm Gina Fugate. I'm the other technology teacher. This is year 4 for me. I come from Vanderbilt University for my TBI degree, and was recruited by Sarah Borley in outreach. So I've been happy to work with Cody, and you covered that really well, so I don't feel like I need to say anything.
Thank you.
I do more of like the coding and sort of more STEAM related classes for the older kids. But other than that, we overlap a lot. Cody does, yes, the Lego robotics. I can leave that out. So
with the award.
Thank you. So we're happy for everyone to be here today, and just going to try to cover a little bit of everything, and then we definitely want to hear from you and cover your questions as well. So thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So LaShawn, let's start with you.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is LaShawn Miles. I am the youth librarian at the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. And I'm here today because as I'm out in the community, a lot of questions do come up about assistive technology, and I'm not as up to date as I need to be on it. So I want to learn as much as possible so that I can relate and relay to parents and children that I meet within my outreach. So I'm very excited. So good morning and thank you again.
Hi, I'm Mike O'Mara. I'm Tiernan's grandfather. We live in upstate New York, and we were traveling home from the winter, and we found out about Parents' Day last Tuesday, so we came to that. And while we were here, my son told me about this. And since I've been retired many years and have a technology background, I was sort of ordered that I was going to be here today. And it was,
You're representing.
I'm very, very, very happy to do this because I had the time and I had the desire to learn everything I can about the iPad because I know nothing about it. I can talk computers with you all day. I can talk Android with you, but I can't talk iPad with you. So I'm just going to be like a sponge today, and I may ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. And as you guys go around, I like how you said, you're here to learn the iPad. If you could like kind of pick out like 1 or 2 things that you kind of hope to gain from the end of this. So yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jean Gillis. My husband, Anthony, sends his regrets he was unable to attend. My daughter, Ashanti, is visually impaired. She's a 5th grade student at Woodhome Elementary School, soon to be a middle schooler at Sudbrook Middle Magnet School. And Ashanti has been visually impaired since she was born. She uses the Braille, let's see, the Braille Touch.
Yeah.
Now we've had the Acrobat. She has an iPhone. She's probably the only one in the house that has an iPhone, given its technological capabilities.
Yes.
We are a Samsung family, so I have my technology. She and I both have Kindles. We share a laptop. And I, like the gentleman here, have worked in technology, yet I am rapidly getting up to speed on all things Braille-based technology and how to best assist her and the school system with how she can leverage technology both in and outside of school.
Yeah.
She had the pleasure of being in the technology camp last year. I was sad that I didn't see it this year, but perhaps as we continue with our summer plans, that might come up.
Did you see the handouts in the middle? There's a couple of handouts in the middle too.
Wonderful. And so I'm just here to learn as much as I can about everything.
Cool.
To be able to take that back and help.
Awesome.
Everybody started off with such great introductions. Wendy Hammock, my daughter Sydney Joyce, is in her 4th year here at MSB, and I'm coming to learn what I can about her iPad. She uses VoiceOver, turns it on, turns it off. you know, has figured out on her new iPad that she can use speech to text on it and uses it a lot, but we're trying to figure out how maybe we can go back to use VoiceOver to have it reread what if it picked up what she's trying to say,
Yeah.
what, you know, properly, because sometimes I'll go back and reread it and I'm like, that didn't pick up what you were trying to say,
Right.
you know, so I'm just trying to get educated.
Absolutely.
And thank goodness that I made it here today. Sydney was sick and was in the hospital overnight, Thursday into Friday. Yeah, she came home yesterday, but she's all better, and everything on the mend, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to school Monday, and everything. But hopefully we can get educated.
And I have her things I can send home with you, because I have her switchboard and
Oh, yeah,
got it all
and-
synced up and everything.
Okay,
so.
because she told me some things about the switchboard, and I was like, she wasn't sure it was her switchboard that she got back, if it was the school switchboard, you know.
Yeah,
and-
we'll
and
clear
so
all
we're
that
trying
up.
to figure
It's
out
all
what that-
it's all good to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm Christine Susate, and my husband Edward. Our daughter is Gracie. She's been coming to the school for 12 years, and I know nothing. And I've come to learn because I think she knows a lot, but she doesn't tell me anything about what she can do with whatever your terms are. So I've come to learn, so I know. My husband knows way more, so it's easier.
Team
So
effort.
it is very confusing for us because when she's home, she will do a little voiceover.
Yeah.
Then she'll do a lot of Siri. Then she'll do something else.
Yeah.
And we are like at a loss, like what medium she's using
Right.
and what she should be using.
Right.
And so we don't know which direction to go, or we need to guide her, or she needs to be more clear about what she should do.
Sure.
And then somewhere in the middle, she'll say a little bit about Jaws, and we really want to use Jaws, and we don't mind making the investment in using Jaws, but we don't know how that will help us. So that's why we're here, to kind of get a better idea.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we don't know what she knows, and sometimes I come to class like, once that year, and then I think she's doing much more, but she doesn't tell us, so we don't know whether we're going to buy something and then she will just sit there, or because she doesn't know or she doesn't want to do it. So, yeah.
And also because since she's graduating, so
Yes.
we need to have some direction of once she leaves here, how we
Not gonna be a lot of support.
technology-wise.
Absolutely.
My name is Susan Kinyari. My background is special ed. I went to Salas to become a TVI. This is my first year being a teacher of visual impairment with the Baltimore City Schools. I'm here because of the new technology which comes every week. So it's a challenge working with the students as a first year's TVI, and especially Braille no touch is a challenge because many kids want to learn about it. And if I don't know how to use it, then I'm not helping those kids. That's why I'm here. And I've met you.
Yes, I was about to say, where have I seen you before?
I was doing my internship with MSB.
Oh,
And
okay.
observe this.
I
Gotcha.
came with
Gotcha.
Kinyari from
Yes.
So,
Awesome to see you here. And
Yeah. Right when you walked in the room, I'm like, oh, I've met you before.
and I saw you
Yeah.
and I said, yes, because I do that connection, because
Sure.
if I have like a braille note and
Yeah.
I need something, I just come straight here and they say, help me with it. I know your office. I know.
Absolutely, yeah.
I know where to find you.
Oh man, no, that's awesome. No, absolutely, anytime.
And
Um,
those are complicated. So
Yeah.
they're great devices. but
Yeah,
they're complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to learn. I've never seen it actually.
I have one here.
Oh,
My daughter
perfect.
Yeah,
acts like
'cause
she
I
doesn't
think
want that. Laura has called it Braille.
No touch.
Braille note touch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge to use because the voice disappears. You don't know how to bring it back.
Uh-huh.
The screen disappears. Yeah, like what?
Oh,
Can I bring out feedback?
those are some easy fixes. I'm a little bit rusty on that, but just for everybody else's benefit,
Yeah.
the Braille Note Touch is one of the first devices that is made for, I would say, the sighted world as well as those that are blind, because you can flip up that Braille keyboard, and then you
Okay.
have an Android
I
tablet.
wasn't really sure why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when I was an itinerant TVI in Kentucky, the moment I would leave the school, I would get these phone calls because you have teachers who don't know Braille and different things like that. Well, you could have a kid in Spanish, French, English class, it doesn't matter. They flip up that screen and the teacher can see the print, not just the Braille, the print. And then the kid can still access the Braille on the display. However, there's a lot of technical support that is kind of needed.
Yeah.
And I would say just like that versus a typical Braille display, and when a kid turns VoiceOver on and off, or it's not working, or it's not paired, are they doing that accidentally? Do they particularly not like this subject? Do they not feel like doing homework? We do have some good old typical kids on our hands.
Just good.
Yeah, so just remember, it's a good thing when they do that.
Yeah.
Well, before you guys start, I just want to introduce
Sure.
myself because there's a couple of you guys that I've never met before. So my name is Renee Kirby. I've been here for, I think, 8 years now. And my daughter graduated from MSB 2 years ago. She went here for 10 years. She started when she was 11. And she is a Braille reader and a white cane user. She's now going to community college. So picking away at that Carroll community. We live in Carroll County.
Wow.
She did go to Baltimore Community College last year. She moved in with her dad, and it was a terrible experience. It was not a lot of support for the disabilities department there. So she's happy to be back, and she just told me last night that she thinks she's not really going to be into education.
I haven't seen her for a while. We're overdue for coffee.
Yeah, we need to talk to her a little bit. So anyway,
Cool.
I'm glad you guys made it, and it's going to be hard when your kids graduated. I won't see you later. But
I know.
it's nice to meet everyone, and I hope you get a lot out of this today. And I hope I do too.
Okay. I just wanted to check on the Zoom people. Nobody has logged in yet, and I don't know why I'm an AP Web, but
Let me check on
Yeah.
two that we're going to log in.
cool. All right. So definitely. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go over kind of what you guys should be thinking about as you start to choose technology, because that's the main point. Is like there's so much stuff out there. Making the correct choice for your student is probably the I'll come on the other side. The reason is probably the most important and kind of the most important thing, and especially the most important first thing that you have to do is making that correct choice. Because if you choose a technology that doesn't work with your student, it can become very frustrating. So we're going to start with that and kind of have that as the main overview, and kind of, I guess, to have you guys come away with, okay, now I have a couple of things that I can think about as far as what I should be going back to my school system or going back to my teachers and saying, okay, I want to think about this and this to make sure that we make the right choice, right? It's just not just about what's out there, but what fits my student, my child. So with that, the schedule for today, I found this really cool thing that I was telling Gina about, and you have to, you can control the slides from your phone.
Nice.
Yeah, of course it just logged me out, but it's really cool.
And it's
And it's free.
free, which is okay.
And it's not working, but it was really cool when it was working.
Please stand by.
Yeah. So
Welcome to Techno.
So just to give you guys an overview of what we kind of think the schedule is going to look like today, because it's such a small group, we can obviously change this. Hi. So we're going to start we're going to start the morning, we're going to talk about access. In the afternoon, after lunch, we're going to talk about input, and we're going to talk about what kind of those two things mean. And then we're going to give you guys, if you have your own devices, times for questions at the end of both of those sessions. And if we didn't cover anything that you wanted to cover, that will be the time that you can kind of use what we just talked about on your own devices, and we'll kind of circulate and try to answer individual questions, okay? Sweet.
Can I ask a quick, does
Yeah.
anybody have a problem with having a picture taken? Because I'm gonna post on Facebook and Twitter. You're all okay with that?
as long as you tag me in it. No, I'm just kidding.
You asked. Cody is in.
Yeah. Cool. So access and input. So I think when I think about choosing different technologies, I think about two different things. And Gina, feel free to expand on this. But two different fundamental main questions that to ask yourselves is, how is my student or how is my child going to access information? And then how is my student going to input information? Okay. Now, what do you guys think of when you think of access? What does that sound like? How are they going to access information? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
How to get to it. I guess.
Yeah. How do you get to it? How do you go from having an off device in front of you to where you need to be?
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else?
Unlocking.
Unlocking it. Yeah. Yeah. Unlocking it. Right. Right. All of the things that, like, signing in. Right.
Speaking with experience.
Right. For real. Yeah. And like, just assuming that there's this piece of information that they need to get on the device and getting it to their brains, getting that piece of information to the student. How are they going to access that? And there's so many different technologies out there that bring that to, and there's so many different like thinking about just a monitor, right? Just you guys looking at this, you guys are accessing that information. For students that have a visual impairment, obviously they can't do that. How are we going to get that information to them? So it's just kind of at the fundamental level. And then input, what do you guys think that means? How are they going to input information?
For me, it's like entering information, using some perhaps device to do so.
Yeah.
And it could be typing, it could be voice, it could
Absolutely.
be any of those.
Absolutely. Hit the nail on the head. Yeah. A lot of times what I think of as an educator, is how is a student going to demonstrate learning? So they've gotten that information, they've retained it. How can they prove to us that they understand it? And a lot of times what we find is if a student has, number one, they have this access method, and they can get that information. A lot of times it's really hard to know if they have that access information because they don't have a good input method, So we kind of have to have both. So that's what I kind of think about when we're choosing technologies. And I think the focus today is going to be for you guys to have an idea of what might your student's access method be and what might your student's input method be. And if you already know that, then how can we refine both of those things? Because if you know both of those things, then it's kind of the world is now you know what you're looking for out in the world, So anything to add on that?
Just, I guess, taking some insight and acknowledgement into what our parents have said.
Yeah.
Input can be a little difficult in that we can think dictation, and definitely they can dictate, but when it gets down to how do you edit what you dictate,
Right.
so there's multi-layers to this.
Absolutely.
And we'll try to acknowledge that and talk with you about our thought process with that. But I think that's some of the struggles that we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, and that's a great point in that, like, sometimes we'll kind of find a half solution. So like sometimes, like for that input method, we might say, okay, well, we've narrowed down this student's input method is going to be dictation. And it's better than what we've had before. It's better than nothing, but we get to a point where we're like, well, we're not quite there yet. And that's where we kind of have to keep continuously asking this question, what is the best method of inputting? Because they can input, but they can't change anything. And it's like, wow, that's a barrier as well. It's better than not being able to input at all.
Right.
But
yeah,
but
I think that's also another thing that we think about. So we try to not have them dependent on a human scribe.
Right.
But then it's sort of like thinking long term, what could we see this student doing and how would they be able to perform that task after they graduate? And we constantly kind of struggle and go back and forth with that, but we're definitely always thinking about that and troubleshooting.
Yeah. So, okay. Any questions on that? Access input makes sense. All right. And so as we kind of think about those things, then we kind of, we think about all of the things out there, and we kind of try to pick and choose these different technologies to kind of fit our student. And just as an overview, these are some of the things that you might hear about, and some of the things that we're going to go over today. VoiceOver, you know, the screen reader on the iPad, laptops, obviously. JAWS is a screen reader on the computer. So how are they getting access on the computer? Zoom Text Fusion, Google Suite, Braille displays, tactile graphics, DCMP, Bookshare, and Typing Club is kind of all things that's a great question.
Described and captioned media programs. So these are sort of our kind of go-to tools at MSB. It applies to most kids by far. So these are the terms and the acronym DCMP, because it's such a long title there, but almost all kids have exposure to these tools if it fits their needs. So DCMP is really one of my favorites because it's only educational videos, and it has described and captioned videos. So there's narrative description talking about what's going on when a character in the video is not speaking. There's narrative description talking about what's going on visually within the video. So it is truly accessible to our students. There are some that are only captioned, but a strong majority do have that description. And again, it's a free resource. So it's like our wonderful libraries and different things like that. We are also aware that families want to reinforce and use what we're using. So free is always a good thing. And they do have access to that. And it's nice that it really narrows it to education only. You don't have to worry about other things that they might get into, you know, like on YouTube and different things like that.
Yes, it's great.
So
Never
what
heard of this.
It's a website.
Oh.
But
DCMP.
there is an app for that.
Oh,
Wow.
there you go.
Okay.
And we do have a school iPad that we'll be able to pass around and things, so you can see what apps are on the school iPads.
Yeah.
That's great. That's fantastic.
The website VCMP.
DCMP.
What does it stand for?
Described and captioned media program.
Yep.
Very
Yeah,
good.
you got it. Yeah, and I think
wrote down scribe and caption.
If you Google DCMP, it'll show up. The actual website is dcmp.org. So D for described. And I do come to Maryland from Kentucky, so I do have sort of a weird accent sometimes.
yeah, and so I think with that specific program, it's really great for a couple of reasons. I just did a technology assessment on one of our students who has cortical visual impairment, and I recommended this because I think videos, the power of videos in supplementing instruction is really, really great for that access method. And then also in public schools, I mean, there's so many things that students get from public schools that are inaccessible, and if we can kind of supplement that and say, give to the teacher, hey, here's this thing that you can use and you can look up, and it is already there, you know.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so these are some of the kind of things that we use on a daily basis. And this is when we get a student and we are assessing them, these are the first steps that we start with on these programs. So if anything kind of sticks out to you as we kind of go over, definitely take a note and ask us about it as we break out into our individual time. Okay.
Excellent. Yes.
All right. The next big question. So we think about our input, our access, we think about the tools, and then big, huge thing, what are the tasks? Okay, what is your student or what is your child trying to do, right? Because that's going to determine what tool they're going to use. If they're trying to make a grocery list, you know, that's going to be very different than if they're trying to read a book, right? So we need to kind of narrow down what are the things that we want them to be able to do. And it's kind of just to guide that question. There's kind of 4 questions up on the board. What is your child doing? What is the goal? How is he or she currently doing the task? Because and that's a big question. Are they doing it at all? And if so, how are they doing it? Because that's going to inform what we choose. And then why is the current method not working? right? Because, you know, if they're handwriting and the reason why their handwriting is not working is because they don't have enough motor control, then maybe we look at typing or maybe we look at dictation, right? But if they're handwriting and it's a processing thing, then maybe we kind of skip typing and we go to dictation, you know? So that's how the reason why it's not working is going to inform where we go, right? So why is the current method not working? And then how can we improve upon that? How can we take that barrier and try to eliminate it through another technology? Okay, so what are the tasks? And then as we kind of go through, I just want to bring this up. This is a concept in assistive technology, the assistive technology spectrum, where, you know, we can take a task and we can say the student can do it with no tech. They can do it with, you know, no tech being, you know, they're handwriting for an input method. They're reading a print book. Low tech, where they might be using a handheld magnifier. They might be, you know, using a reading stand, or then high tech. And we want to make sure that not every answer is going to be high tech, you know. And there's a lot of students that me and Gina talk about this a lot, where we're like, you know what, technology might not be the answer for this task, and that is okay, right? Because, you know, the world has a lot of technology in it, but it's not totally encompassing in technology. There's lots of other options. So I think kind of just making sure, or, you know, maybe it's a low tech option. We don't need to be, you know, we don't always need to be saying, here's an iPad, here's a computer, here's a, you know, $8,000 device. We could say, hey, here's a reading stand that costs $10. That's a lot easier to get doors to fund, right? So that's kind of a thing that we want to bring up as well. It's, you know, something that in the world of technology, something that is often forgotten.
And sometimes different tech for different subjects, but then again, thinking long-term, you know, what are they doing career-wise? So it may be really low tech for math. It may be higher tech for English. So just kind of always remembering, we always try to think immediate is what I think of when it's short-term, but we always try to think that long-term too. Where do you see your child going, or what do you think that they're capable of doing? So when we're thinking about that, it's just sort of, oh, what tool would be helpful in that environment that would be accessible to other people that they're working with when they do need assistance occasionally. You know, questions like that.
Yeah, so it's really, does it fit the student? Does it fit the environment? And does it fit the task? And when that environment changes, or when that student changes, when that task changes, you know, the device is probably going to change. So just because, you know, a student, exactly like Gina said, uses one thing for English, or one thing for writing a grocery list, or one thing for reading, does not mean that it's going to be the same for math, because, you know, that task has different barriers. So, all right. So this morning, we're going to focus on access. How is that student going to get the information to them? How are we going to get that information to that student? And so what we're going to talk about, screen readers first. Well, we can talk about screen readers. This is kind of from least complex to most complex, kind of.
Take a deep breath here.
In a right, in a broad sense, this is least complex to most complex. So screen readers, does everybody know what a screen reader is? Can somebody explain it?
It reads the screen.
Absolutely, it reads the screen. It goes text to speech. Absolutely.
It reads everything.
Yeah, it reads sometimes way too much.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I have a question. When it's
Yeah.
going so fast, do they know, like my daughter, does she know what is being read? Is it she's used to it?
Well,
Yeah.
that's a great question. That is something that I think we're going to answer in the next couple of slides. So yes.
But if we don't come back.
But if we don't come back to it, yeah. So least complex, VoiceOver. It's a pretty VoiceOver and TalkBack. Very. That's for iPhones, iPads, and Android devices. Pretty simple. It's very gesture based. We can do a lot of adaptation through switches, and so we can kind of accommodate. That's probably the least complex, or on the less complex end of the spectrum. As we get to computers, Chromebooks are pretty simplified screen readers. They're pretty good. NVDA, JAWS are screen readers for Windows PCs. They are pretty, you know, technical, complex. And then
And they
VoiceOver,
cost, right?
and well, NVDA is free.
Oh,
JAWS is $9.99, $999.
wow.
So, right, but NVDA is a free alternative. And then VoiceOver for Mac, I would say that that's probably the most complex screen reader because, and that's arguable, you know, that's an opinion thing. But I think it takes a lot of spatial awareness to be able to navigate VoiceOver on a Mac because it's very, yeah, we could go into it, but I won't.
You're resistant.
Yeah.
So just real quickly, the way I think of that, because everybody gets confused of all of the different names, I think of those as brand names.
Yes.
So as long as you know screen reader means speech to text, you can speak in general terms about that. So for our purposes today, don't get too distracted by that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we say screen readers, that's not the exhaustive list of screen readers. There are screen readers on almost every device these days, you know, like we're about to use my Fire Stick. Does anybody have a Fire Stick or a Roku or a Google Chromecast? That all of those have screen readers, which is amazing, right? Like you would never think that a TV device has a screen reader. Everything has screen readers. It's just any piece of software that's embedded in a device or you download it separate that reads the screen out loud. So
We
So-
also have a remote that you can talk into.
Yeah, we do.
right,
Yeah,
like
I have a
absolutely.
too, which
Yeah.
is good because they're also all computing,
Mhm.
which helps the quality go up and hopefully for costs to come down. But the demand is there, so
Right.
it's a good problem to have.
And window narration, is that's a screen reader as well, right?
Windows narrator. Yep.
Yeah,
Narrator.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
why did we leave that off?
because it's I hate it.
I know you do,
But so the thing with narrator, and that I just went to a conference in Orlando and I talked to somebody from Microsoft. It's classically been a really non-comprehensive screen reader. It's left a lot of things out. It's really hard to navigate.
Okay.
But this guy at Microsoft told me that in the new update that's happening in like 2 weeks, it's going to be much more robust. And so he's like, take a look. And I'm like, okay, you know, I'm never not okay to try it. So it could change in the next 2 weeks. So we'll see.
So do you put it on the least or the more complex?
It's going to be a lot like JAWS and NVDA.
Okay.
There's two, when it comes to computers, there's two kind of broad categories of screen readers: Chromevox, NVDA, JAWS, and narrator, all in the same category. VoiceOver is its own separate category, just in the way that you navigate it. VoiceOver for Mac, not VoiceOver for, but don't worry about all of it.
Screen reader for Roku and Fire Stick?
Yeah, it's called Voice View. All of Amazon screen readers are called Voice View. And it's in a lot of those that are available for those streaming devices are embedded in the accessibility menu. So if you go into the settings menu, go into accessibility, it'll be in there.
Thank you.
So yeah, it'll be embedded.
And they do updates and things too, so you always have to kind of check for that.
Think of a work on Roku TV?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now Roku's is not called Voice View. I don't know what Roku's is called.
I'll find it.
Yeah, but it's in accessibility. If you go into settings and accessibility. Yeah, I was actually I was with my niece and nephew, and they're like, we want to watch TV. And so I'm like, okay, sounds good. And so I'm like, what do you want to watch? And then I'm like going through settings and I'm like, oh, accessibility. Let's see what's in there. Wow, there's a screen reader. And they're like, can we watch TV now? And I'm like, hold on. This is important.
That thing, like, my granddaughter was watching something called Bunked.
Oh, okay.
Would that take that and convert that into adaptive?
No, so it's not going to do anything for the actual show.
Just get
But
in there.
you'll be able to navigate the menus. You'll be able to when you use
So it's
the
not-
yeah, it's not going to do anything for the actual media.
Okay, so Tiernan watches, he listens to adaptive movies, and my son gets off of Netflix and there. This is something different.
This is like if you were going to use the Roku remote.
Oh, okay. I
And
got
go
you.
through the
All right,
menus?
okay. Now I got
Yeah,
you. All right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, but though the
Yep.
adaptive movies off of Netflix also really awesome.
So that's text to speech
Just have to
versus
buy that.
narrative description. I think
Yes.
is what you're touching on.
And
Yes.
Comcast also has something with the
Exciting.
Xfinity box because they have the
Yeah.
VoiceOver remote, and they also have where you can turn on where it'll read the screen.
Oh,
And we
that's
got that
awesome.
for Sydney, and she can do her TV by herself.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that's a perfect example of a screen reader that we kind of haven't covered. It's just they're everywhere. So
Well, and I haven't watched it myself in all the spare time I don't have, but Hadley School for the Blind has a series of workshops right now called Tech It Out, TECH. And I know that
I
they
love
did
that.
one on, I think, TVs and things at home. It's a lot of house-based and community-based things. So that's on my to-do list, but I'm sure that they covered that recently. They've also covered things like grocery delivery services and what is accessible.
Wow.
So a lot of things that would be especially applicable when they're gearing towards independence and after MSB that we try to touch on with our older kids, but we don't get into the mechanics quite as much.
Yeah.
But it's on the to-do list.
Yeah.
That might be something to put in the newsletters. Actually.
cool. All right, you want to go over VoiceOver?
Sure. So just for the sake of simplicity, just remember that VoiceOver is a type of speech-to-text feature, and don't worry about all those brands right now. And this is where we're sort of trying to emphasize what we do specifically at Maryland School for the Blind with what we emphasize the most. But definitely, if you need to talk with us about TalkBack or get assistance with that, we're definitely open to working with you on that as well. So for our purposes, we emphasize VoiceOver strongly in grades 1 through 6 because those kids start out with iPads. That does not mean that they don't have any exposure to desktop or laptop computers, but the kids do have their own individual iPads that they are assigned to that has their work on it. And then they would get exposure to other things either through technology class or the library, different aspects like that within our school. VoiceOver does benefit the blind and visually impaired, but it could be useful to other people as well. So when I think about anybody with a print disability, things like dyslexia, or some people that just learn better by listening as well as looking, VoiceOver can be handy. So you can, we don't have this on there, but there is something called triple click home where you can press the home button 3 times if you have it set up to do that. So you can turn VoiceOver off and on very quickly. If you don't do triple click home and you explore it in the settings innocently, you can turn on VoiceOver and get kind of trapped if you don't know the gestures and things. So Apple has gotten better with kind of warning people about that, making it easier for them to turn that off. But I learned that the hard way the first time I taught a blind student in a public school. Left the building and the superintendent came in and said, student, talked with that superintendent and had him turn on VoiceOver and they couldn't turn it on. So I was fresh out of grad school.
Amazing.
It was awesome. With VoiceOver, students can swipe. So to swipe is just touching the screen, and they're typically going left to right. So it is linear. But there are other gestures to go up and down. Sometimes they're using 1 finger, sometimes they're using 2 fingers, sometimes you're using 3 fingers. So that's where it can get kind of complicated quick and parents can get really overwhelmed. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring all those things up. One of the more complicated aspects of VoiceOver is something called the rotor. And it can control, I think, like 33 features. Wow. It depends on what you check. It is often used for adjusting, navigating characters within a word. It could be line by line. It can control the volume. It can control that speech rate, turning it up and down. So it can do a lot of different things. I don't think parents have to know every single aspect of that, but just having the concept and the exposure so that you can talk with your child or adjust it as needed is sort of an important feature. The gesture to control VoiceOver rotor is probably among the most unique. They describe it as turning a dial on an old TV, which I think is funny because now we don't really have TVs with dials, but I am old enough to remember that. But I had to like get a dial so that kids could understand what that was. So
yes.
I took them to a washer and dryer, and it was the easiest thing. I'm like, feel this, you turn it. So you're using that gesture to kind of turn on the screen, and that gets you into the rotor. But what is on the rotor depends on what is in your settings. So that's sort of like a VoiceOver in a nutshell overview.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is my favorite line to staff and sometimes to parents a lot. Don't get vexed on VoiceOver because sometimes it gets really confusing. So VoiceOver is a free feature, and as I'm going over these things, these are things that particularly come up with teenagers and parents coming and asking us various questions. So VoiceOver is free. It has always been free. I would anticipate that it always will be free. As there are different versions of iPads, sometimes students will be under the impression and or wish that the latest, greatest iPad has the best VoiceOver. To my knowledge, there's no difference.
It's like stayed the same for a long time.
Yeah, it's a selling point.
They're sitting there like 12.1.5. You're like, listen, it's the same.
They always get very excited, and we don't have to worry about Apple News. The kids come and tell us.
Right,
"We're
yeah.
not the latest, greatest."
They know before us.
So in fairness to them, the only exception to this would be like some of the oldest iPads are not capable of updating to the latest iOS. And that is the reason why we have upgraded the iPads at the school. But VoiceOver still worked on those older iPads. So it's just a misconception, but especially around the holidays and birthdays. A lot.
Magically, the conversation comes up.
Oh my gosh. And so the rotor, I did kind of touch on that. You know, it controls the speed, it can control the volume. I think our younger kids especially, and Cody can speak to this a lot, when they're first learning how to do that, sometimes they get into it for entertainment purposes. They just kind of want to see what it does. It's sort of like when you have a kid that discovers that they can change the languages on an iPad. So my first year at MSB, I had to learn a lot of Polish and Turkish. The whole thing would change. And thank God for Google. So the rotor is a feature that they can do that. So sometimes it's intentionally, sometimes it's not. So it's just something to be aware of. It's not anything breaking, it's just a setting. The screen curtain is one of my favorite things to talk about because it's sort of like the VoiceOver being free conversation. So I'm going to turn this on.
So I'm going to project it on the screen.
Oh, we're going to try that. Hold up.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, ready?
Screen. This is something new that we discovered, so we're very excited. Yes.
There it is.
Okay. That is so cool. Okay. So it is mirroring the iPad. So I'm doing my triple click.
VoiceOver on. Portrait. App Store.
Sorry, it's so
Double tap to open.
intimidating.
We haven't controlled that. Volume keeps blasting us.
I know. Well, I keep turning it down.
Okay. I wonder if it's in two places.
I maybe.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, with VoiceOver, so now I can just swipe left to right. Hey, our volume, we lost it now.
Huh.
I didn't do that. Did you do that?
Double tap to open. Dictionary.
There we go. We did do that.
Double tap to open.
So just some of the basic features. So double tap, I open something. Screen curtain is something that I also had to learn very quickly with our students. So 3 fingers, 1, 2, 3. So the iPad is still on, but it looks like it's off.
Right.
And for some of our students,
Nice to meet you.
they will give the impression that the screen can no longer be on because they're using their devices. So whether they're paired with a braille display, they could be on YouTube. Maybe they're listening to a Bookshare book when they should be doing math. This is one of those creative ways that students try to get out of what they probably should be doing. Oh, Ms. Gina, you can't turn that off. Well, actually, your 3 fingers, 1, 2, 3, and it'll come right back. So when we were talking about things that parents and teachers, paraeducators need to know, this was one of our top
Absolutely.
features.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many times walk around school and kids will have earbuds in to their pocket. They pull out their phone. They're like, look, it's not on. I'm not listening to music. They are, you know. But I mean, the screen curtain is also a really great tool. So I use it a lot for if anybody is working with or has a child that is dual media. Now I'm looking around. I don't think anybody here. Well, dual media where they really, really, really want to use their vision to tap the screen, but they are very poor at it. And we're like, we want you to use voiceover gestures. The screen curtain is a really good tool. We turn it off. Now, like for right now, just use your listening and just listen and just flick so that we can kind of make sure that they're rewriting those pathways to make sure that they're listening instead of looking. So it is a really good tool as well. A lot of times what I tell parents is if at the end of all of this, if you're like, oh my gosh, there's just so much stuff to think about when we talk about voiceover, there are 90% of what you can do on the iPad, you just need 3 gestures for. And that's a right flick, a left flick, and a select, a double tap. And that's really, for the first 3 years that my kids use iPads, that's all I teach them because that's all they need, right? So if you are confused as to how we're working this, if you look up on the screen, there's a box around that first app, the App Store. If I want to move to, let's say, the clock app, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my one finger, I'm going to flick to the right, or I'm going to swipe to the right, and there's no sound again, but it goes to the next app. But it goes to the next app, right? If I want to keep going to clock, I just, every time I flick, it goes to the next app. 1, 2, 3, and then when I get there, I'm on clock, I double tap.
10:34 a.m.
Now it
Double
decides
tap.
to, yeah, there
It's
you
a
go.
lag. It's a
Yeah,
lag.
yeah.
It's still up there.
Okay, all right, cool. So that's all you really need to know is right flick, you move forward, left flick, you go back, double tap to select. And then once you're in the app, let's say I want to go down to that alarm function, all I'm going to do is right flick until I get to that alarm function.
4 o'clock. Heading. App. Button. World map. San Francisco, New York. 10:30 London. 2:30 Paris.
Now it's going to take a
Moscow,
while.
5:30 Beijing. 10 World clock. Paris. 3 Moscow.
Oh my
Beijing,
gosh, it's going to take
10:35
forever.
Tokyo. Select alarm. Tap.
And then once I'm there, double tap, okay?
Edit.
So 90%, like I said, 90% of what your student needs to do, 90% of what you need to do is 3 gestures, right flick, left flick, select. Now, rotor and all that, that's where you get into, that's where this becomes a really, really powerful tool. But if you're like, oh, I'm not there yet, 3 gestures, okay? Cool. Any questions on VoiceOver? All right. Okay, so let me switch it back. So just kind of thinking about, okay, so now that's the tool. That's the tool that we might use to access, for access. What is going to be the way that we can instruct our students? Let's see if this works. 1. Oh, I'm on laptop. Laptop 2, right? Laptop 2. There it is. What are some of the instructional methods that we use? Okay, so that right flicking, that left flicking, that double tap, those are kind of gestures that for some of our kids are really, really difficult to do, whether it's a motor thing, whether it's a processing thing, whether it's just such a large area that you can do so many different things on that it really has to be super precise. So one of the things, Ms. Uzarte, you brought up now, that you kind of touched on. Can you ask your question again about
the speed of
yes,
the
yeah,
voice?
yeah. Can you ask it again?
Yes, does the student understand when it's going so fast?
Yeah, so that is the first thing that we think about when we're considering VoiceOver or a screen reader, any screen reader, is the student not doing anything? Can they listen and tell us when they hear something? Listening comprehension. So one of the first things that we do when we're assessing a student to see if this is a viable option is using a slow speed. Can they, like if I'm using the iPad and I'm flicking, I'm going to say, tell me when you hear clock. And when you hear clock, like put your hands on your head or put your hand on the table or tell me or whatever, however they would answer, tell me when you hear that. And if they can do that, that's check number one. Now, when the student turns it up, that listening comprehension is going to go down until they get it. They get it back, until they get used to it. Now, I'm sure everybody has seen, you know, adults with visual impairments that have screen readers that are talking like, right? That's a developed, learned task. They have developed that listening comprehension skill when the voice is that high. Now, a lot of our students, we have this conversation all the time, will think, wow, I want to be just like them, which is great. We want you to be like them. And they'll turn that speech up super, super high, and they'll be like, I'm amazing. My teachers have no idea what my iPad is saying, but I know, right? And in reality, what happens is they might hear kind of the broad overview, but they're not hearing those details, because there's a lot of different things that VoiceOver says. For example, when you get to an app, it'll say clock, double tap to select, right? Which, you know, they might know that, but if you're in an unfamiliar situation, VoiceOver gives a lot of these instructions. They might miss them if the speech is too high. So listening comprehension is really the fundamental thing that we look for. And part of that being that we need to have a speech rate that the student can kind of get all of those little details of what it's saying. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? How do you slow it down?
You can use the rotor, like Gina was talking about. You turn that knob until you hear speaking rate, and then you flick down, okay? Or you go into settings, and you can go into the VoiceOver settings, and there's a speaking rate section. You can adjust it that way. Yeah, okay?
So what if the student can't tell you, or they won't tell you?
Yeah,
That
that's a great question. What if the student won't tell you if they can't hear it, or they, yeah. Well, I mean, that's a lot of, you know, that's when we've kind of come out of the world of assistive technology, and we kind of have to blend with, okay, well, now we have to set up like a behavior system along with the device, or we have to come up with a creative way to get that student to buy into what we're doing. A lot of the times, it's trying to find something of interest, trying to make it really structured, so there's a lot of different things, and it really depends on the student. And I know we've spoken at length about this, but
so do you think it's better that we set it at the rate where we can understand it, or we assume students can understand it?
I think if you feel like, if that's where you feel comfortable, absolutely. Like I think a lot of times, and I think a lot of times the student will say, I can understand it at this rate, when it's like, and in reality, a lot of the time, that's not true unless there's been a progressive, like the only time that I've seen a student be able to listen at that rate is when I've heard him and her go very slowly up that ladder, right? If they turn that speech rate all the way to 80%, and it's like, I'm willing to bet they're missing 90% of what's being said. If you work with that student to kind of build up that speaking rate, then it might be true, but it's always going to be pushing a limit. Like slower is always going to be, they're definitely always going to get more information when it's slower. So yeah.
Let me jump in for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think just a couple things here. That's part of why we're doing this workshop, is we want you to walk away knowing sort of what you should know, like how it works. But if in doubt, and you needed instructions on something like that, you know, email us, and it's not that difficult to do some screenshots. Also, never underestimate the power of Google, because that's what we do a lot, you know, to look up this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you are, let's say that you were looking up VoiceOver rotor, you just put in that phrase, you're going to come up with several websites that even provide the screenshots for you. And also in that Google search, if you go over to videos, there's a lot of kids, as well as different people in universities, Voc Rehab, that are making how-to videos about all of this that are actually pretty good. So usually within 5 minutes, we can find an answer fairly quickly.
Absolutely.
But if you're running into trouble, then by all means get a hold of us, and we can help out with that. I think the other thing is kind of going back to behavior, and maybe helping the student or your child think through Okay, you understand that. Here's an article that I'd like to discuss with you, and send them the link and have them read it at that pace, and then kind of see what's going on, or ask them to slow it down and then see if they're comprehending more. So trying to sort of work around our students in a way with that behavior to help them understand why we want it to slow down, and maybe they're a little bit less defensive that way. The other thing that I would say about that is it really depends on the subject matter. So our top students that can listen at incredible speeds, you know, they have to adjust it depending upon the subject matter. So their listening comprehension speed for English is probably a little bit different for science. And depending upon what they're reading in English, you know, VoiceOver gets really creative with foreign languages and Shakespeare, any of the older text. So that's an example of when they might need to slow it down, or depending on their screen set, they may need to turn off the volume and use the Braille display, or go back to, you know, embossed Braille or print. So that's a really good example of where we're thinking of that spectrum of like, what is the best thing to help them with their task.
And I think this is only one option of that matched technology. So like a lot of times we'll try VoiceOver with a bunch of different instructional strategies and with, you know, adaptive switch control and stuff. It's all this stuff. And at the end of the day, it's only one option, you know, so there's a lot of different options. And if this is not the option that works for your student, that's okay. That's why there's a bunch of stuff out there. So really kind of thinking through. A lot of times we'll get into this rut in assistive technology where we're like, this student uses this, right? And let's go in this direction. And then it's not working. And we're like, okay, well, we'll try to adapt it. We'll try to work around it. When in fact, we need to just be moving in another direction. And that's where that matching technology comes in. So not to say that you shouldn't try to use what everybody else is using, because it will obviously be much easier, but sometimes it's just the wrong direction. So kind of to keep going, I wanted to go over if students are struggling with the gestures, what I use a lot of times with the smaller kids, or the kids that have trouble with this, is I call the circle technique. And this is used with flicking, all right? And the problem with flicking is your finger, when you're flicking right or you're flicking left, has to be moving when it hits the screen and when it leaves the screen. If you put that finger on the screen and then flick, it's not going to work. If you like flick and then stop, it's not going to work. It has to be moving when it hits the screen and when it leaves. So what I get students to do that are struggling with this is I have like a whiteboard or something up in the air, and I say, take your finger and draw a circle on this whiteboard, and I'll have I have a tactile graphic of a circle, and we're just drawing, and and we'll go through like draw the circle, right, and kind of get a rhythm going, right? And then what we'll do is we'll take an iPad, we'll remove that, see if they can draw the circle without it, and then put the iPad right underneath it, and that translates right into a flicking motion. All right, this is how we got Tiernan to start doing this. Yeah, and then once they get that, we put the whiteboard back up and we're like, okay, draw your circle. Now, wait a minute. To go backwards, we're going to go the other way and then do the same thing again. Remove it, see if they can maintain it, and then put the iPad underneath. So, circle technique, okay? There's been a lot of kids that just with that approach and just that way of thinking about it, we've gone from no way that they're flicking to, oh, they can flick consistently because it's just developing a rhythm. Right? It's just developing a rhythm. Now that we have to then match that motor with the listening comprehension, try to put those two together. Once we can do that, we're getting somewhere. Okay. And if this is successful, then we're like, okay, now we start to see this access method start to build, you know? Yeah.
And that circle technique is golden because when we talked about the screen curtain earlier, students who have some functional vision, but it's not really functional enough to read anything, they're leaning forward and they try to do this poking.
Yeah.
And this kind of takes that away because that motor memory kind of kicks in, and they're more successful, because otherwise we'll have students who they're not only trying to do that poking, but they're trying to visually get things, and then they're not swiping left to right, and they
Right.
start doing this up and down thing. So that's
Yeah.
why we're really solid left and right first, and just stick to that first instead of the poking.
Yep.
So we try to do that really for all of our students.
Yep.
And Cody has perfected that, I have to say, with everything from play sand. I remember you bringing in all these bags and different
Oh,
things,
yeah.
and the trays and
Oh,
salt
yeah.
trays and everything else.
Yep. So I mean, there's just a lot, right? So we like have taken trays and we're like, okay, we're drying circles in shaving cream and sand and like all of this stuff just to get the motor memory and just to be like, okay, you don't want to walk into class and be like, we're drawing our circle again. Now we're drawing our circle, but with sand. Yes, it's totally different. But like,
So you're like, I thought this was technology.
right. Somehow, sometimes classes turn into something else.
They
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of just thinking through how are we going to get this access and really putting in a good effort, because this is a really powerful technology. And then the last thing that me and Gina talk about a lot is then, okay, that double tap. What are we going to do for the double tap, right? That's a really hard gesture to do because you have to do it quickly. You have to do it close to the screen. A lot of times it becomes this, and you're like, okay, well, that's not going to work. And when we struggle with that, or we struggle with the circle, we can then bring in different switch controls, which are switches are just buttons that we can wirelessly or wired connect to the iPad. So then those motions now become touches of different buttons. And that, if we can do that, and the student can then listen and touch different buttons, then there you go, we found our access, right? So, and we can do that with flick can become a touch of a button, a select can become a touch of a button, a left flick can become a touch of a button. So that's kind of the progression from, no tech, low tech, high tech. This is even beyond that to like, we're adapting that high tech, all right? So
the button is in case they can't get the.
Yeah, if we look at that student and they've been trying to double tap or they've been trying to flick and it's just not for whatever reason, mainly because it's a motor issue, then we can use that switch, that button to do any one of those things.
Because like Gracie's blind, so
Mhm.
you've got to get the double tap on the very same icon, right?
No, you can do it anywhere on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Anywhere on the screen. So right when that box, like when we had the iPad up there, that box moved.
Okay.
You can, double tap anywhere on the
Okay.
bottom left corner, on the bottom right corner, just
Not gonna
anywhere
move
on that
unless you
screen.
swipe.
So even if it's focused up here, as long as VoiceOver is on and I'm clicking consistently, it doesn't matter. That's the reason why it doesn't require the vision
Okay.
or anything to do it. And then also this is one example of a switch device. So Sid has used this a lot. So that green select button replaces the double tap for a student that has like motor challenges, and sometimes this is just easier for her. But I have to say that Sid is one of those students that uses multiple methods. It depends upon the subject, and it depends upon her fatigue, and sometimes her motivation.
Right. You
And
guys want to see this thing?
So then this has to be portable, right? If she's going somewhere and using the iPad, then she's got to take this big old switch thing.
And that's something to think about too. And that's why
Yeah.
we're constantly reviewing, like, do they really have to have this? And that's
Right.
also the reason why there's different switches. So there's a little Bluetooth one. So you might start with something like this and then see if you can kind of shrink it.
Mhm.
You also want the student to be able to manage it. And honestly, one of the challenges that we have with this switch box is that on the back, there's a little black strip, and there is a round symbol that is the off-on button. Right beside it is a little P, like in print, and it stands for profile. But what we're finding is that staff and students will think that P is power, and they're resetting that profile button, and then they're having trouble pairing it and different things like that. And the person who makes this has been working with special ed and special needs for a long time. But when I looked at his directions, they were just a lot of words and different things. So we've kind of made Sid's Switchbox Secrets is what I'm calling it. So she hasn't seen this yet, so you can go home and tease her a little bit. But it's color coded, and I just simplified the language. So we are able to get it to work consistently. In Sid's case, she has like a shoebox that she's actually really proud of. It has styrofoam, and she made this box to take her switch around. She's really proud of it, and it works for her. So if the student likes it and takes that ownership, you know, more power to her. Sure. I think we'll still, you know, expose her to different tools because of that portability and thinking long term, where is she going to be? How would this fit into her career plans and rec and leisure? Is this going to be something that if she needs help, another person can sit down and assist her with?
And they also have a box. The box is still the same size as this box, but it only has 3 switches on it.
Yes.
You know, so it all depends on.
And that's the other thing. They're always coming out with more models and different things like this. We actually discovered this device honestly by accident. It was visiting MD Tap and looking at other things, and I saw that and said, what is it? And we borrowed it, tried it out. Sid was gracious to try it out and fell in love with it.
She enjoyed it. She's proud of that thing.
She is very, very proud of that thing. And it does last. It seems to be pretty durable. So it's just getting around sort of those wordy directions. And it's a really low cost device where a lot of switches start to get more and more expensive. You know, when we talk about different tools, we're always trying to look at that price tag.
Did you say how much that?
150.
150. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
and they do provide
up to
really good
199.
tech support.
I don't
Oh, did it?
know.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk about MD Tap at the end, because that's a really awesome resource that you guys can, you know, when taking away from all of this, if you say, oh, I want to try out this device, or I want to try out this device, MD Tap is a place you can go and do that. So
And it's free.
and it's free, and it's close by. Cool. So well, I'll just go through, and then we kind of get into input, but as for access, you know, let's think about all of that's just kind of VoiceOver or screen readers is just kind of one aspect of what is out there for access, how we get information. Obviously, when we think about screen readers, those of you using this Braille Note Touch, what is on the Braille Note Touch, that Keysoft, that's a screen reader as well, and navigating that, you know. So if you guys want to try out anything, or if you have any questions at this point, before we kind of break for lunch, we have about a half hour before, or I don't know, do you have a time frame for lunch?
Oh, probably half an hour.
Half hour, yeah. So it's 11 now. If you guys want to ask any questions, if you want to try anything out, we'll kind of give you guys kind of free reign, and to ask any questions. Anybody have any major questions about, you know, general questions of anything we went over?
Well, no, this is something different, like refreshable braille.
Yeah, okay. So refreshable Braille. So anytime that we have a screen reader, anytime that we have voice output, we have the option to add Braille to that. So with VoiceOver, with JAWS, with any of those screen readers that we said, with obviously with Keysoft and the Braille Touch, there can be an option to add Braille to that. And what that is in addition to voice output, or instead of voice output, you can read on a refreshable Braille display. And I have one that we use here, so we can pass that around. And this is just a Braille display that the Braille cells change based on what the voice is saying out loud. So if the voice on VoiceOver says clock, double tap to open, it says in Braille clock, double tap to open. And you can turn that speech off, you can turn that speech on, you can disconnect the Braille display. So this is just another option we have for access.
What are all these?
That's a Braille keyboard. So just like a Brailler, you can actually input.
So that's what they use to input.
That's an option, you know, that's an option, yeah.
Yeah. That's what it's designed for.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you've got your Braille keyboard and your your space bar, everything.
So that's why it's called refreshable, because what the voiceover is saying, they can read it.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
line by line, it's changing.
It's changing.
Yeah, so it's providing real-time Braille.
Okay.
You know, because Braille does take up more room than print, and it's not realistic, unfortunately, to carry around Harry Potter. I think Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is like 3 volumes of Braille. Because I remember seeing that for the first time, like, whoa.
Yeah.
But they can download that, and if they still want to read the Braille, they can do that through things like Bookshare, and get that hard Braille. You know, reading textually. They can also listen to it audibly. They could do both audibly and textually reading. And then they could also look at something on the screen. So there's just so many different types of options now that's the reason why it's so important to have this thought process to analyze everything.
Right.
So when they come to the end, it automatically goes to the next sentence.
They hit a thumb key,
You hit
Okay.
one of those keys on the front.
Okay.
the very front. That's
And Gracie
parallel
uses
to
this
your-
all the time, right?
She has used that before, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's different versions of Braille displays. But they all have some commonalities. So that front part that's kind of parallel to your body has 4 thumb keys, so you can use that to go up and down lines, or you can go left and right. There's also, if you're looking at the refresher Braille cell itself, there's like a little round part above it, and when you press that, that will place the cursor there. So there's a lot of different options there. Our students will also use a lot of Bluetooth keyboards, and honestly, she's used that a lot. So it's one of those things where students have lots of different options. They receive the instruction, and eventually they kind of develop their own preferences. Sometimes we have to encourage them to, you know, if they're a Braille student, I think we're always wanting them to use that Braille to keep it current, to do the editing and different things like that. And that's sometimes when it becomes instructional and sort of behavioral.
Yeah.
I would rather dictate than type.
Right.
I don't want to learn how to spell,
Right.
even though I know we're running into all the homonyms, you know, different things like that. So that's when you kind of get multi-layered challenges where
Right.
your tech can overlap, you know, with your core content.
Absolutely.
My daughter uses this with her phone to the text.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that
yeah.
is also their favorite
Yeah.
thing to do. So
Yeah.
because they can pair that with their phone as well as their iPad or their laptop, they'll often have trouble pairing back and forth between different devices,
Absolutely.
which is a good problem to have, and you know, a skill that they need to know. But if they can, you know, text back and forth using this on their phone, more power to them.
Yeah.
And their grocery list and everything else. So you start to think of long-term and short-term usability. There are Braille displays. I didn't bring any of the little ones, did you? That's what the smallest one is 14.
Oh, the human wear on them? Yeah.
Yeah, and the APH is 18 right now, but it's
Yep.
about to switch to 14. Those are becoming more popular because they just about fit into a jacket pocket. So I've actually seen people on the buses and different things that have those because they want to have that access to Braille when they're getting phone calls and taking notes.
Yeah.
So that everybody around them can't hear what they're saying, because otherwise you can send a text
Right.
by
Absolutely.
But
dictating.
you also, you know, imagine carrying this around. It's pretty hefty.
Yeah.
But fitting that into a jacket pocket, it's still against you, or
Right.
putting that into a backpack.
Right.
This cost is also around $4,000
God.
25.9.
with the warranty and all that stuff.
I don't know. No, that's just the base price.
Yeah.
25.9.
So it gets pricey really quick. Now these are fairly durable, but it's still something to think about long term. Whereas that little one that we just talked about, there's about to be a new release, and that's just under $1,000.
Yeah.
But you can get one just under $1,000 right now through HumanWare. But HumanWare and APH are teaming up, so there's a new one that will be released next month. It's a nice shiny red. Should be more frequently available because of that collaboration with HumanWare. So we're excited about that, but then you get
Absolutely.
into all the discussions about how many Braille cells does
Right.
a student need to read.
Right.
That was my question, because you said 14, 18, are you referring to the number of cells on the Braille?
Yes.
Yes.
display?
So this one is a 32.
30, is that a standard? It should have 32?
I have
Ah.
18.
Yeah, I mean, there's standard is not, there's not really a standard. It's kind of you're gaining. Now you can read Braille. This is not research based, but anecdotally, you can read Braille faster on a larger Braille display
Right.
because you don't have to keep switching lines.
Right.
But you're sacrificing speed for portability. So just like if you want, it's just the difference between, do you want to carry around an iPhone or do you want to carry around an iPad?
Right.
You know, both can text. If you have a plan on them, both can, but like I want to carry around this, even though the screen is smaller,
Exactly.
you know, so it's kind of that trade-off is
Right.
what I would compare it to.
Does it split in the middle of a sentence? So if it's displaying and there's a word and it doesn't finish the word, does it split in the middle of a word, or does it go all the way to an end of a sentence?
It does it mostly by line.
Line.
Yeah. So it will say, like, if there was a sentence that was on the same line and it said, like, the cat ran, period, the dog sat, right? It would say that whole thing as long as they could fit it. And
Okay.
and as long as it was on the same line.
Okay.
Now, if it said the dog ran and then on the next line it said the cat sat or whatever, it would.
Okay.
But
Okay.
and then for you guys that are here for the Braille Note Touch, essentially what the Braille Note Touch is a Google tablet with specialized software attached to a Braille display. And so that's kind of where we get into, like, oh, is it going to be an actual Google tablet with a Braille display? Is it going to be a Braille Note Touch? So all of these are different things that we consider when we match technology. So.
And just to clarify, like, that is one of the most popular questions to ask, is about what number of Braille cells there should be, because we've discussed this numerous times. And because this is what they call low incidence population, there's not enough research out there, really. So that's the reason why
Absolutely.
there's a shortage in our field. And for a while they had these fellowships where you could basically sign up for a PhD and they were almost paying you to do it.
Wow.
To do these studies and
Right.
everything else. So it's sort of a constant challenge. Do Cody and I stay in the positions we're in, or do we go back to school to do the PhD and quit teaching?
Right.
I don't want to quit teaching.
Right.
So I plan to stay put. But when it comes to coding, you're doing a lot of typing and it's taking up a lot of space. So you couldn't do, I won't say you couldn't do it. It would be a lot more difficult when you have a smaller Braille display.
Right.
So that kind of goes back to, what is the purpose? What are they really using it for?
Right.
So are they using it for typing more so than reading, or are they using it really in a balanced dual purpose way?
Right.
So at this point, if you guys have your own devices, we can kind of take out your phones. If you want to turn on VoiceOver, if you want to turn on TalkBack and try to play around with it, we can set up that
And I have
triple.
2 iPads at least that we can.
Yep,
do,
and I have
including Sid.
a Kindle. If you guys want to try a Kindle,
I have a Kindle too.
yeah.
I'd like to try it.
yeah,
But
absolutely,
Ashanti has
absolutely.
a Kindle and an iPad.
And we'll kind of come around and help you guys out.
Go to settings.
Is this a Kindle?
Yes.
Okay.
educational books.
Yeah. So what you're gonna go to settings, which should be in, if you go through, it should be in the apps. If not,
Yeah, I remember seeing it, but I can never find it when I'm looking.
so here's I guess an easier way to find it is if you drag from the top, and then up at the top there should be, yep. You're gonna go to let's see if we can find it.
Accessibility.
Yep, accessibility, and then you see that first one, voice view screen reader.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can turn that on, and you can actually let's see, what does it say? You're about to turn on, yeah. And so you can, so it's just warning you because you might get stuck, but that's okay. So we're gonna say okay. Enable explore by touch. Yes, we're gonna do that. And then this is a whole tutorial that you can read through, and it's gonna teach you about the right flick, left flick, and double tap, as well as some other gestures. So this is kind of your little like fake
Right.
Kindle, you know.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So, and this is really great. That's something that Apple doesn't have, that
Right.
all of the Android devices do.
Oh,
Where
wonderful.
once you turn on voice view for the
Right.
first time or talk back for the first time,
Yeah.
you get put into this tutorial.
Oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then once I go through it, then I can
Absolutely.
access.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Now, how do I do it on my?
Okay, so let's take a look at your phone. Is this an
It's a Samsung.
Samsung? Okay, so same thing. We're gonna open it up. We're gonna go to settings.
Okay, so that should be right up here.
Because like the
too.
multi,
It should
usually
be.
2 or 3 ways to do
Maybe
this,
that's
and
not
then
it.
another sort of blessing and curse all.
No.
No, and it
Okay,
might be in
here.
all apps. Yeah,
And I should have it here somewhere. Anyway,
there it is.
I don't know who that is. Okay. All right. Very good. Then go back to settings.
Yeah. You're gonna go to accessibility again,
Oh,
and then this is gonna be called talkback.
maybe.
And so
we're
So I can assist her.
And that's where, you know, she's still
Have text to speech.
uses.
Let's try that.
But
It's not exactly what we want.
still give her so much influence. I'm honestly
Preferred
amazed
engine. I wonder what
at how
that
much
is.
she loves
So the thing about no,
and
this is
how
not one.
proud
The
she
thing
is
about
that she brought her box.
Android is there's so many different versions. Oh, we're gonna go to Vision. So many different
Really into it,
versions.
and that's exactly
Voice
Voice
assist.
assist. Okay.
Never heard of that, but it's probably the exact same. Like you're gonna
Okay,
open it up,
right,
it's gonna be
yeah.
the exact same.
Okay.
Or turn that on. We're just say it's saying the exact same. You might get stuck. Oh, enter a pin. And then it's gonna, you know. Okay.
Voice assistant on. Voice
And then there you go. There's your tutorial.
Wow. So is it true that I didn't necessarily have to buy Ashanti an iPhone? I could have stuck with the Samsung?
Correct.
Wow.
But I will say, this has changed in the past couple of years. So
Right.
now this and this are very similar.
Oh,
3 years ago,
right.
this was definitely better.
Got
This
it.
hasn't changed at all.
Okay.
That's gotten much
This has
better.
gotten better. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. This is good to know.
Yeah, so like last year, I
Right.
had the first time my student said, "Oh, I'm getting a new phone. What are you getting?" He's like, "An Android." I'm like, "Hey, it's gonna suck, right?" And he brought it, and it launched into this tutorial, and I was like, "What?
What?
This is
Wow,
amazing." So,
this is awesome.
so
Okay.
yeah, at this point, they're pretty much the same.
Okay.
Pretty
Very
much
good.
the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'll let you
Thank
play around with that. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah, you got to work. Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. VoiceOver? Yeah, sure. So, you know, this is exactly what yeah. So, okay, so we're gonna go to we're gonna go to settings, and then in general and accessibility. This is where all the accessibility stuff is going. And then you see the first one, VoiceOver. Now, what we can do is we can do a shortcut. So we're here, and I'll go all the way back here. We're in settings. Right? We're gonna go to general, accessibility, and then instead of going to VoiceOver, we're gonna go all the way down. See, that's this accessibility shortcut. That is the triple click button that we're talking about. And we're going to set VoiceOver. Now, with your phone, with my phone, it's a double click of the because yours is an iPhone 10, it's going to be, what is it? It's like a swipe up or something. Yeah, but I want to. Oh, I have to say.
Double tap to activate. For changing granularity, touch interaction is blocked while tutorial information is being read aloud. Voice assistant has granularity controls that give you different ways to navigate through text. For example, text can be read aloud character by character, word by word, or line by line,
So
paragraph
now
by
you can swipe
paragraph.
up and hold,
To get started, tap the text field in the center
and
of the screen.
VoiceOver will be
So he's
Yep,
like,
and so now it's on. You can click right, you can click from.
downwards from the top of the screen with 3 fingers to select the level of granularity.
Yeah.
Swipe upwards from the bottom of the screen, downwards from the top of the screen with 3 fingers to select the level of
And I think
granularity.
she's confused with her as well too. She wants to change. She's excited.
Yeah.
And then when
Swipe upwards from the bottom of the screen, downwards from the top of the
Well,
screen
we'll save it
with
for
3
this
fingers to select
afternoon.
the
We'll
level
go
of
through
granularity.
We're gonna go
Changing
over all
granularity.
of the
Navigating with
subjects.
target text field.
Sid was like,
Absolutely. And Gina is
yeah,
Gina's
she's
the one
ready.
that's kind
And
of
so then
taking
she
on
just
that.
kind of.
So I can tell you a little bit. Gina can tell you. Okay. But yeah, we can definitely go through that.
Designed by Samsung Electronics. Swipe upwards from the bottom of the screen, downwards from the top of the screen with 3 fingers to select the level of granularity.
But because it made it.
Designed by Samsung Electronics. Swipe upwards from the bottom of the screen or downwards from the top of the screen with 3 fingers to select the level of granularity.
Yeah, so it's just a flick, single flick. Yep.
Next button.
And that's like 90% of your
Navigate
stuff
away from the target
you
text
do with
field.
this, and
She
then
was
when you
my
find it,
editor.
Touch interaction is blocked while tutorial information is being read aloud. This chapter can help you edit text
yes.
easily.
So there's a lot of other things
She
that
was all
when
about
I
it.
swear
This is
90%.
directions and you
And double tap anywhere on the screen.
I'm like, well,
Edit box
You get it?
designed by Samsung Electronics. Double tap to edit. Double tap anywhere on the screen with 1 finger to start editing text.
Absolutely.
Edit box designed by Samsung Electronics.
she still will.
Double tap
Now,
to edit.
The battery.
He
Double
used
tap to enter text.
that for a while,
Double tap
and it
hold
was
to
a
long
really
press.
big
Double tap
pain
anywhere
to
on the
like
screen
pair
with
it
1
and
finger to start
so
editing text.
what I started with him
The cursor by
is
swiping
a
up or
smaller
down
version
or
of that,
using the volume
because
keys.
he can flip. He uses the
Cursor
draw your
back 2
circles on,
characters by
and
swiping
then all he
upwards
needs is
from
a
the
button.
bottom of the screen twice.
So I'm taking a device that has just one button, and he's really good at this.
Zero.
You know, but
Double
yeah,
tap
you can
and hold
definitely
anywhere on the screen with 2 fingers to select text character by character. Double tap
actually like
and
a
hold
braille,
anywhere on the screen
like a
with 2
manual braille.
fingers to select text character by character.
Yeah.
Double tap and hold anywhere on the
Right.
screen with 2 fingers to select text character by character. Double tap and hold anywhere on the screen with 2 fingers to select
Okay.
text character by character. Double tap and hold anywhere on the screen with 2 fingers to select text character by character. Double tap and hold anywhere on the screen with 2 fingers to select yes. Cursor to end. Next.
Gotcha.
Six other functions. Touch interaction is blocked while tutorial information is being read aloud. You can pause or resume audio files or videos by double tapping anywhere on the screen with 2 fingers. Try to pause this audio
Now,
file now.
I'll tell you,
Now
the
play music.
brailler, that's like been the
You
same.
can hear
for-
status bar
as
information
we
for the
change.
items you've selected in
I
voice
would
assistant
just be willing to
settings,
bet that's
including
what.
time and date, signal strength, Bluetooth,
Yeah.
and battery
But,
power by triple tapping with 2 fingers anywhere on the
What
screen.
we can do,
Try it now.
because he's reading it in braille, correct?
Now
Yeah.
playing music.
Is that right?
She's typed it too, so it's more than
Gotcha.
You can hear status bar information for the items you've selected in voice assistant settings, including time and
Braille,
date,
yeah.
signal strength, Bluetooth, and battery power by triple tapping with 2 fingers anywhere on the screen.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Try it now.
unfortunately.
11:14 a.m.
Yeah, sorry. I wish I could say it half. Because at least the other option would be to get something like this, but this is
To do this, select
so
an item
much
you want to add a custom
that
label to,
it
then double
would
tap
be
and
kind of
hold it with
overkill.
3 fingers.
And I think it would be more
You can
hassle.
hear the most recent voice feedback and copy it to the clipboard
Yeah,
by triple
yeah,
tapping
yeah.
anywhere on the screen with 3 fingers. This
Yeah.
concludes the voice assistant
Yeah.
tutorial.
And one of the really
If you want to
exciting
take the
things
tutorial again, go to voice assistant
is when
help.
we get into input,
To close
we've
the
been working with
tutorial, tap
dictation.
finish at the bottom right finish
He
button.
loves like
Double
he
tap to
loves
activate
like
voice
sitting
assistant.
and what we started to do is he has a switch, he has a button, he speaks what he needs to into the microphone, and then the computer will read it right back to him. And he absolutely loves it. It's really hard to recreate at home, but we will get into, like this afternoon, we'll get into how we can use dictation on the
Home
iPad.
screen,
And he's like
page 1
pretty
of your
close
default
to
page,
being able to do
page 1
that.
of your
So,
default page.
but yeah.
Now look,
Before we leave, can you like some recommendation of websites and apps or something?
Absolutely. We have all on the
now look,
PowerPoint.
preparing 3 period.
No, it's okay. On the PowerPoint, we actually have, as we get into the input, we have each category, we
George
have
Willis,
just a bunch
471.
of different apps that we can use. Now, some of them are not going to be like the touchscreen apps. Yo, that's, can I do?
Open navigation door button.
This is not going to be for you.
Show
But, I
items
mean,
1 to 13 of
things
16.
like,
Inbox. 9.
no,
Focus inbox
keyboarding,
is
I don't
on.
know if a lot of these are going to be
Something,
dictation.
Toggle to other mails switch. Focused inbox
Yeah.
is off. Showing other mails.
Yeah, yeah. Let me
You can give me one game.
Maryland Academy of Dance. 10:11 a.m. Unread message. Invitation. Grand opening new dance hall. April 22nd. 4 o'clock p.m. 7
Okay,
o'clock
yeah, we
p.m.
can definitely
Maryland
do that.
Academy
We
of
can definitely do
Dance.
that. We,
Owensville's MB. USA
if we
joins
go,
us as we
no,
celebrate
it's
our
okay.
grand new dance hall.
If we go into the App Store
ESW.
and you kind of start looking for, it's called Blindfold Simon.
Grand opening new
There's
dance
a lot of games that you can download and they're made for kids with visual impairments. So Blindfold Simon, I mean, you can look it up right now and see if you can find it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm 6 years.
You guys okay? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. That's what. Sure. Right.
So when it's our process, the
Right.
Voice screen turned off. Ringer vibrate.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Let me tell you about a product that is really awesome that I've seen. It's called Synaptic. And what they do is they create a phone on an Android phone, and it's like super simple. And it's like make a phone call, and it has a screen reader attached to it. It's like make a phone call, send a text, send an email. It has like 5 options. And instead of going through this entire operating system, right, then she has like a couple of options, and it's super large. Right here, let me see if I can find it online. But yeah, I was just at a conference and I saw that phone, and I had seen it before, and I'm like, yes, I love this thing. And that might be a really good thing for you guys to check out.
So that might help, but then I guess it's still like with your behavior, how will that go into radio?
So she should do something that is like the person that wants to know what's going on. To know what she knows, or if she really has a problem, then she has a problem.
And so, you know, the item is.
How you guys doing over here?
How can I get out of here?
Ah, yes. Let's see. Always the question. How do I get out of here? No, it's okay. So you can always just go back to the home screen. That's always what I tell. And I am so bad with the iPhone tab. I like later on.
If you reach the top of the screen, lift your fingers, place the lower on the list, and continue sliding up. Listen for the distinct screen sounds.
So it's like when you swipe up to go home, there's a couple of clicks, like one.
Previous button. Shop Amazon
That goes
Club.
on, and you can go all the way up. That's the
Calculator.
app.
Safety browsers.
So it's 1, 2.
Firefly.
You can always go home, right? And that's what I tell my students. Like, if you get lost somewhere, always just get that home screen. Yep.
Settings.
And then, so like, if you go into something, like, let's say I'm gonna go.
You can swipe 2 fingers along the screen.
Now, like, try to
For
go
example,
if you're lost.
this screen contains a list of app names that can scroll up or down.
There it is.
Now
And
place
do you hear
2
the?
fingers on an item in the
Yeah.
list and
Once it
slide
hits
both
the
fingers
second.
up. If you reach the top of the screen, lift your fingers, place them lower on the list, and continue sliding up.
And
Listen
voice.
for the distinct scrolling sounds.
And sometimes.
Good. You can also scroll an entire page by swiping your finger. To scroll to the next page, swipe right then left with one finger using a single motion. Try to scroll to the next page by swiping right then left. Listen for the distinctly scrolling sounds. Show a terrific tic-tac-toe. Showing items 17 to 33 of 57. F4 in a arrowed. Terrific tic-tac-toe. Good. You can also scroll an entire page by swiping your finger. To scroll to the next page, swipe right then left with one finger using a single motion. Try to scroll to the next page by swiping right then left with or live.
Oh, triple click
Good.
the side.
Swipe terrific tic-tac. Good.
This one.
You have finished the accessibility tutorial. Continue listening for tips on typing and to learn how to navigate to accessibility settings. To exit
Yep,
the
and so now it's set up.
find
So
the
now you
finish
have it
button
on your phone.
located near the bottom right corner of the
So
screen.
1, 2, 3.
Then double tap to activate
VoiceOver
it.
on
Finish button. Screen reader.
There you go.
Showing items 1 to 7 of 7. Navigation bar. Home button. Home button. Home. Showing items 1 to 35 of 38. Search button. Shop button.
Stocks. Welcome to stocks. Insert camera. Triple click the side button. Respond if you're 1 to 3 pieces of
Word search.
use it to bring down
Word search.
the current trend that it stocks. Welcome to Starbucks. Welcome to stock.
Word search.
Excuse me, it's a restroom someplace?
Yes, it's all going down the hall on the right. So as soon as you pass the
Web view.
kitchen.
Word search. 11:23 a.m. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock screen. Screen turned off. Ringer vibrate. 11:23 a.m. Swipe with 2 phone button. Double tap to activate. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock screen. E. Echo. And messages. 11:24 a.m. Ashanti Phyllis. We are at Pizza Hut. Bobby, I miss you. Mecca waiter said hello. It was asking. Screen turned off. Ringer vibrate.
FaceTime audio.
11:23 a.m. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock screen. Screen turned off. Ringer vibrate. 11:23 a.m. Swipe with 2 fingers to unlock screen. Camera button.
Oops, sorry.
Double tap to
Absolutely.
A. Move to the end. Backward. Capital G. Y. Yankee.
Yes.
I can't unlock my screen.
So I think
Screen turned off.
it's
Ringer
I
vibrate.
am doing it. It says swipe with 2 fingers and I'm doing it.
Messages. Camera. Swipe with 2. Your
Oh,
PIN
look
contains
at
at least
you.
4
So
digits.
you know
I don't know what I did differently.
I think
though.
you.
It must have. It
I
might be
don't
from the
know.
back, from the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
So like, if you're like this. Oh, apparently not. Okay. Here, try it.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
Swipe the screen turned off. Ringer vibrate. Lock screen. 11:24 a.m. Swipe with 2 fingers
I
to
am reading.
So I think, and this is where it's like the gestures just kind of take some to getting used to it, and it's just motor memory. Try to do it like that, like you're doing like a flick instead of like.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
my, okay,
Yeah.
I'll try it.
There.
Let's see here.
lock screen. Screen turned off.
See, my nails
Your
might be
nail,
getting in the
right,
way,
right.
Because I'm definitely touching joy. Can you?
Yes, I can, of course. There you go.
I have to turn this off.
Yeah, there you go. How's Ashanti doing?
You know, she's doing good, and she's doing good with her reading, she's doing better with the braille, no touch.
Good, good, good.
Well, we are finding some challenge is a couple of things. So the first thing is her TBI, and the teachers still haven't
She
found
has
that.
Grace?
Yeah, still haven't found that perfect way to work together.
Okay.
So Ashanti has been saving her work on a thumb drive to then turn into the teacher
Sure.
because we can't get that whole
Yeah,
screen thing
yeah.
going.
The
like-
Schoology stuff.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so that's kind of interesting.
Gotcha.
And then she still is having some challenges with spelling the words. Like she'll spell it and it sounds like it's the right words, but sometimes it just looks like gobbledygook when she's writing.
Sure. That's always a barrier with Braille readers. And it's just, it comes down to reading. Because, you know, the more times you see a word,
Right.
the more you're going to be like, oh, I know how to spell that. Just from memory, not even coding,
Good coding,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
yeah, so, but that's good that she's doing well.
Good. She's
Yeah.
doing good.
And what grade is she in?
Fifth.
Fifth.
So this is her last year in elementary school.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So we're
yeah,
going to
yeah.
middle, and so
Cool.
yeah. This camp conflicts with the dance camp that she's in, and so unfortunately she wants to do dance. Yeah, yeah.
We can touch that line committee.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And, the camps are free and